real world interaction with QuickBooks Online that we wanted to do. One of our clients wanted to be able to create journal entries, and he had some very specific requirements about how he wanted to create the journal entries. So our first choice, of course, was to try and do it in Claris Connect, and we were really, really hopeful. And I spent a bit of time playing with it, and I really liked, the things that I liked about it was being able to easily connect to QuickBooks Online, take care of the login, and replicate things that direction. But I ran into a couple of sort of showstoppers, and then ended up having to switch over and use the API manually and then build posts from within FileMaker. So I'm not going to be going into a real deep dive about what I experienced, but what I did want to show was sort of what we were trying to accomplish, and where I ran into sort of a couple of failing points that I wasn't sure how to get around. And so I ended up having to choose a different selection and go with using the API directly. So the first part about getting the journal to work was, of course, connecting to QuickBooks Online. And I hadn't done it before using Claris Connect. And I thought it was going to be super easy because I already had a developer account set up with QuickBooks Online, and I had a couple of sandbox accounts. And so at first I banged my head against the wall. And then I finally found this thread. I banged my head against the wall because I couldn't get it to work. And then I found this thread that said that you can't use the sandbox for connecting with Claris Connect. And I'm not sure if that's been resolved, but it wasn't working for me initially. And that you have to basically set up sign up for a free 30-day free trial and then use that account. So I signed up for a 30-day free trial, and then I linked that to my developer account so then I could test different things from the developer account. I don't know that you need to connect it to a developer account in order to use it and test using the API Explorer, but that seemed a lot easier because I wasn't quite sure exactly what was going on under the hood from Claris Connect when it was interacting with QuickBooks. And I wanted to be able to see how the calls were being made and, of course, adjust them and make sure I wasn't missing anything. So the first one, which was basically to do a test journal where I just wanted to push some information into QuickBooks from FileMaker. I'd give it some data to actually just make a journal entry, a very straightforward journal entry. Here was the test journal workflow that I created. I did a script trigger from FileMaker, in which case I would be passing a JSON object with some variables basically of the line items that I would want on the journal entry, and then went into the actual creation of the journal entry. And this is where I hit my stumbling point. So the script trigger is pretty straightforward. I'm guessing everybody's probably experienced that and is familiar with it. Passing a JSON object to it's really straightforward. But when I went to create the journal entry, that's where I kind of hit some snafu. And it's pretty straightforward for connecting to it. One of the hurdles that I ran into was I was logged in with my developer account, and I kept trying to figure out how to disconnect the sandbox account that I had been trying to connect to, that it was failing to connect to. And I didn't realize that if you're logged in the same browser session, that it's just going to automatically connect. And so I had to log out of QuickBooks, close my browser out, reconnect to Claris Connect, and then log in manually again under the free 30-day trial that I had signed up for. So hopefully that'll help somebody if they're going down this path. If you're running into problems getting authentication, you've got multiple accounts you're dealing with, just quit the browser, close everything out, make sure you're completely logged out of both, log back into Claris Connect, and then delete the existing QuickBooks in there, and then go ahead and add a new one in and follow the authentication process as it prompts you, versus if you're already logged in, it's just going to automatically take that connection and try and use it. And that may or may not be the connection that you want to use. I did find out, in order to resolve that, which was this is another one where, so we've got our flow, right? So if I come out here, we've got our QBO flows that we're working on, and we've got our app connections, making sure that I came out to this flows level to remove that QBO account and delete it. So then when I was going to create another flow and reattach it, that it would create another app connection to the correct QBO account that I wanted it to connect to. So then with the actual journal entry, this is where I ran into the next little snafu. And this one sort of was the deal breaker. And I called Kate in on it so we could get a couple of eyes on it just to make sure I wasn't missing something. So the journal entries that our client had wanted was if they were in QuickBooks and they came in here, right, they do journal entry, they want to be able to enter in, they, wanted to put a value in, and then they would say, $1,000 here. And then they put in a description of this is a test or whatever, right? Then they'd come to their next line, and this would be, maybe something else, a fee or something. And this would be, 1,000. And then the last one, and I might be out of order on this, accounts payable, and it needs to balance, right? So you have your debits and your credits, and those need to be equal. But they had 3 or 4 or 5 lines. I mean, they could have many different lines that are in here. And this is where I hit a weird snafu. I couldn't figure out, they also wanted a journal number to enter this journal number in. I couldn't figure out how to get this journal number to populate. It would just increment up from whatever the last journal entry number was. But the other one was the multiple lines. And this is what I found. And I might be off on this, so please let me know if somebody's done this and they're familiar with it. But under Create Journal Entry, you have a debit account that you can select from. So I could select just like I had in the other one. I could say accounts payable or accounting fees. I have a class reference and a department reference. These threw me off a little bit for a curve because neither of these are in the QuickBooks Online when you're creating a journal entry. So I wasn't quite sure what those are for. I'm guessing that if you have a list of classes and departments, that you would be able to select from those lists, and then it would link to those, either a class or a department. But as this was a brand new test account, I didn't have any of those set up. So when I went to look at them, there wasn't anything in there.
Brandon,
yeah.
Did you check the API to see if they're required? Well, required's got asterisks on there.
Yeah, so exactly. That was that. Yeah, the API is where I ended up going, and it's not part of the. So that was the other question, is when I started going down the API path, and I'll get to that in just a second. That's when I realized that the API isn't asking if we do journal entry in here, that the journal entry here for creating a journal object, that it's not referenced in there either. And when you actually create a journal object, it's not, the department and the class weren't referenced. And I might be on the wrong one, but yeah, journal object here is create journal entry. So, credit line detail type, basically everything in this JSON object is what's returned. And here's the values that you would pass. So, I had account reference, and you need to have the account ID value. So that was the next sort of phase. So I kind of worked at it backwards, right? I didn't realize that I needed the account value, but I'll get to that in just a second. So I kind of went about it a little bit backwards. I hit a wall, and then I came and looked at the API. I think if anybody's going to do the QuickBooks thing, definitely connect a developer account, set up an account, test it with the API so you can get an idea of how the calls are going to be made, because you will need to reference these from, if you're going to reference these in your FileMaker solution, you would need to pass, like, in order to do an opening balance equity journal entry, I need to basically use that. I need to reference that value, that 39, because
it sounds like you actually have to create the journal entry first and then pull it for the ID number, and then you can set the other values.
No, this is the account. So you have accounts.
The account number. Okay.
Yeah, you have to get the account number. So these account numbers that are here in the pull down, right? These have an ID number. So I can't, you can call them by name if you're doing it manually in Claris Connect. So as I select accounting fees or accounts payable AP,
gotcha.
It does it. But the value that you need to pass in the JSON object from FileMaker is the actual ID. So when we go to review and test here, you'll see it automatically it does the lookup and automatically replaces that. So in order to get those account IDs before you could do the journal entry, you actually need to get the account names. And so I built one to get the account names and query by the account ID. So basically I could create a record in my FileMaker solution to get a list of all those accounts. And then I could reference those IDs because those are going to be needed if you're going to pass that data on into QuickBooks. You need to be able to have that key reference. So I'm kind of all over the place on it, but let's get back to the journal entry. So this is just a test. I'd selected an account and it's going to replace it with the account ID for me so I can test it. The class reference and department reference, I'm guessing they're not in the journal entry screen when you're creating them. They do have API references for them, as you can have a class or a department. So I'm imagining if I created in my QuickBooks test account, I created a class here that I would be able to reference that class and it would somehow associate in QuickBooks. And I'm not familiar with how the classes and departments would associate with the journal entry, but I'm guessing that they would be associated with that journal entry in some way. I didn't bother setting those into them, and they're not required. So we have our debit amount and the debit account, the debit amount, our credit account, and then the credit amount. And of course, the debit and the credit amount have to be equal because they have to balance. So this was where the breaking point was. There's only two lines here, right? I'm not able to put in a JSON object that has multiple lines with multiple debits and multiple credits that could then balance out in the journal entry. And so that was where I ran into the sort of snafu where it's like, oh, shoot, I'm not going to be able to do this because we needed to be able to do multiple ones of it. So if I review and test it, you'll see I do get my response back where I went ahead and created those two line items. And if I look at here in my journal entry, and let me cancel this out. And I'm sorry if I'm hopping all over and if you're not familiar with QuickBooks, but you can see it creates it, and it created the two line items and it balanced, 5,000 against 5,000, but that's it. It only puts those two line items in there. And I don't have control over the actual number like I do here for the journal number. So those were the two things that sort of broke it, made it where I couldn't use Claris Connect for this solution. Might be able to use it in others. I really liked the ability to, the authorization was pretty straightforward. Once I found that I needed to set up a free trial, 30-day free trial in order to use the account. Yeah, so that was my dip into Claris Connect using the journal entry, some of the problems and things that I ran into, what questions that I had. I think if I was going to help somebody with it and wanted to help them, I'd say, make sure you look at the API Explorer with the developer account so you know exactly what the calls are going to do, because they're going to help you a bunch. And that helped also a ton when I realized that I needed to get the accounts and get the account ID, because in here, you actually need to have you need to form the request, the select statement for the query, and that needs to conform with the API as a select statement. So you have to look at the API in order to figure out what this. I mean, this is sort of pretty straightforward SQL query maybe, but it's really helpful to be able to test it in the API Explorer first to know that you have your select statement correct before you then start plugging it into the FileMaker side. So anyway, did anybody have any questions? I didn't get to use it much past that. I ended up switching over to using FileMaker curl and doing posts and gets to gather all the information. And that was pretty straightforward. The hard hurdle there, of course, is the same, getting the authorization to work and then being able to maintain that. But once you have that down, the structure is very similar. You would create a similar workflow in Claris Connect that you would in FileMaker, where you have to get the different pieces, you have to test them for errors, and so on and so forth.